on the 30th of June. If businesses want to take advantage of the government scheme, they certainly do have to act quickly. The GMB union has been telling us here on LBC News they are pushing for Queen Mary's Student Union, the Queen Mary University Students' Union, to be able to be part of the scheme before it closes. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this now here on LBC News with Joe Vinson, the Students' Union Commercial Services Officer at Queen Mary University. A very good afternoon to you, Joe.
Good afternoon.
Well, thanks for joining us here on LBC News. Tell us a bit more about your situation. You want to join the furlough scheme, but you can't at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. So we have about 200 students who work for the Students' Union in the bars and cafes that we have on campus. We've been asking the university to allow us to access the furlough scheme now for just over 2 months because all of our workers are on 0 hours contracts. So if they don't work, they don't get paid. But obviously under the furlough scheme, everyone would get 80% of their average wages in the last tax year. But the universities continue to refuse to allow us to access the scheme and actually said it would be unethical for us to do so because the scheme for 0 hours workers, they believe, is slightly generous, I think. So we've been calling for this for months, but instead the university are leaving us thousands of pounds worse off every month. In May, it was £21,000 worse off, and that number will continue to grow for as long as we're not on the furlough scheme.
So is the university essentially saying it's a moral question?
Yes, they're saying it's unethical for us to access the scheme because they think the scheme is basically more generous than we would have earned potentially if we were actually at work. But of course, the government sets the formula for calculating furlough pay. It's not up to the university to make a moral judgment on that. But obviously they've decided that they will. And I find that very disappointing considering that students obviously are finding this period difficult enough with their assessments as it is without having extra financial worries. The job market is very small or negligible. And of course, students aren't able to access universal credit without withdrawing from their studies. So they really have nowhere else to go.
And do you really feel like the university is not listening to you?
We have tried to negotiate with the university for weeks and weeks, and they refuse to listen to our arguments. In fact, they emailed one of our staff yesterday to say they consider the matter to be closed. So they're just not listening. And of course, although the furlough deadline is the 30th of June, workers have to be furloughed for 3 weeks to access the scheme. So effectively, the deadline is on Tuesday. And we have taken legal advice and we'll be looking at our options in the future.
And the GMB union supporting you, what have they been saying?
Well, GMB believe our interpretation of the guidelines is exactly correct. And indeed, it's the same interpretation that thousands of businesses and other universities and student unions across the country have come to, which is that 0 hours workers should be paid according to the government formula. It's just Queen Mary University that seems to have its own perspective on this, and no one can really rationalise as to why. But GMB Union have been fantastic in making that case, as have all of East London's MPs, the Mayor of Tower Hamlets. The list of people who believe that this decision is wrong is enormous, and yet the university continues to deny us access to the scheme and in effect is leaving people in really dire financial situations. We've got people who have taken hundreds of pounds worth of a pay cut during this crisis, and of course their bills and rent still keep coming in. And students notoriously have very little money as it is. A lot of our staff have caring responsibilities or don't have access to student loans. They rely on that money to remain in London to study, and at the end of the day, Queen Mary University has walked away from them.
And what have other universities been doing?
So lots of other universities have accessed the furloughing scheme, including for students' union workers, but also for their own staff, actually, within their own universities. And Queen Mary is actually refusing to do that for its own staff as well, and talking about the potential need for redundancies in the future. So why they won't access the scheme and save as much money as they can now in order to safeguard the future of both their staff and of the educational experience is questionable. There are numerous examples of universities accessing the scheme, including King's, LSE, UCL, Manchester, well-known universities who are comfortable with accessing the scheme and recognise the need to give those workers the money that the government has set out that they should get, and also B, make sure that their own financial balance sheets remain as good as they can be going forward. But at the moment, Queen Mary University has refused to access any of the government funds available going forward, but is predicting a loss on their balance sheet in the hundreds of millions in the next academic year. So why they would choose this approach is absolutely beyond me.
The university, in a statement, has said they're committed to ensuring as far as they're able that no student is financially disadvantaged by COVID-19, and they're continuing to review the guidance for the furlough scheme to assess whether Queen Mary should apply to furlough any of its staff in line with the government's guidelines.
Yeah, they have said that, but of course we know that's not true because we've released testimonials online of our individual student staff and the impact it's having on them. We've got examples of people where, you know, they're now having to take money out of their dead father's war pension, which is supposed to support their mother, to make sure they can remain in London. We've got NHS key workers who are working more shifts to support their children, to make sure they can stay in London and do their studying. I mean, the examples go on and on. People in serious commercial debt now because of their need to stay in London and do their work and continue with their assessments. So the university know that actually everybody pretty much is worse off under the current arrangement than they would be on furlough, but again refuses to listen, refuses to give people what they're entitled to, and has just walked away from those people.
All right, well, thank you for talking to us here on LBC News. That's Joe Vinson, the Student Union's Commercial Services Officer at Queen Mary University. It's just gone 2:20.
This is LBC.